Hello, welcome to Contact. I'm Gloria Creighton, and we're here once again at lovely Anderson's restaurant overlooking Falls Creek. My guest on today's show is a man who most of you have already met over your morning coffee, well-known columnist for the province, Mr. Bob Stahl. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Gloria. Hi.
So good to see you here. I guess you don't have a deadline today.
It's a day off. I actually work 7 days a week, 27 hours a day, and I tell my editors that I never have time off, so we'll have to make this an exception.
I was going to say, do you ever have a day off? I mean, being a writer.
It's a curious kind of perspective. You could either feel that you're always working, because you've always got to be absorbing things to retell and rehash the next day, or else you're feeling that you're always off, and you never have to do anything except maybe do a column 3 times a week, right?
But you got those deadlines coming in.
Yeah, I haven't actually managed that last part too well, but I'd like to. That's the whole idea of being free as an artist, to be able to do your thing. But, you know, the reality is deadlines, the reality is writing, the reality is constantly pushing to be on the job.
Mm-hmm. And with all this freedom, Bob, does the old guilt settle in at times? When you know you should be writing, or you're out for a run, because I know you're a runner.
Yeah.
You run regularly?
Yeah, I run through the forest, and I pretend to leave my cares behind. But you know, I think writers are compulsive. I think runners are compulsive. When I got into running, I couldn't just run recreationally. I had to run marathons. When I started scribbling, I couldn't just fool around. I had to commit myself to a column 3 times a week, which is haunting my daily existence. I think I'm that kind of personality, but you probably have to be to produce constantly and consistently.
Do you find you burn the candle a lot? Do you do a lot of all-nighters to get the deadline?
Yeah, not as bad as it used to be. I used to be a magazine writer where I'd write 5,000-6,000 word pieces. Then, you remember when you were in university or high school and you had a term paper hanging over your head, and everything you did was a stolen moment away from when you should be working?
That's right.
That was the worst. That was those lengthy projects. So actually, newspaper writing is a bit of a luxury. You sort of wind up into your piece of that day, and as you're still stretching, it's finished. That's I mean, I guess this is, you know, it's once again the runner. The marathons are really arduous, but to just crank out a mile, I can do, and I could pull this out of myself 3 times a week. So that's probably the saving grace as a writer, and as a columnist for a newspaper. There is that luxury of just writing short.
Right. You said once to me in an earlier chat that writing's like improv to you.
Yeah.
You know, you get one chance at it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's that feeling of being out there on a deadline where you can't really take it back. People don't really realize that, you know, the lively arts of performing and singing and dancing is very close to something that seems more contemplative and reflective, like writing. When you're close to a deadline, you're out there in public performing, and it's a situation where you'd better be on, and you'd better be on your game, because it could fail terribly. It's also a very public thing. I mean, aside from being public, I mean, it's
exposing
public.
It's your soul
exposure. Oh,
to
yeah.
the public.
Yeah, and it's terrible in here. You really don't want to know what's in here too often. So you've got to be able to let it come out in such a way that it's natural, that it's also entertaining, that it's informative, that it's all those things. And if you fail at it, it's very embarrassing. Mm-hmm. It's like, I mean, picture a stand-up comic.
Right.
Not working, not getting any laughs, not connecting.
They try harder. I interviewed one, and I said, what do you do when it goes dead? She says, well, we just try harder, or they put it back on the audience.
Okay, I don't get the feedback.
You can't, that's right, you don't
instantly
get the feedback. Yeah.
So I often work as an editor as well as a writer. As I'm working, I can end up sitting back for a moment and really taking a hard eye, a hard view of what I'm doing, you know.
Mm-hmm. Do you read, do you pick up a paper when you're, you know, and look at your stuff in print? Do you find that hard? Or do you do that?
Yeah, I guess it's like you doing a TV interview and looking at the stuff afterwards and editing it into shape.
Right.
Very often when I'm writing, I can often find myself working more as an editor. In other words, if I'm blocked as a writer and it's not exactly coming at that moment, I can sort of spew it out, get it down, blather it onto the page or into the computer, and work it over later as an editor. I spent probably half my journalistic career as an editor shaping other people's copy.
And we're going to get into that later.
Okay.
But right now we're going to go back to your column.
Okay.
Okay. You deal a lot. It has been at times a real tearjerker. You deal with a lot of social issues, very emotional human issues. And actually, I remember in the intro I said that a lot of people know you with their morning coffee. And I have a little story for you. All I got you here is one morning I was having my coffee and reading a column. It was the column on child sex abuse.
Oh boy.
And I looked over at another woman having her coffee, and the tears were coming down my eyes. And same with her. And I checked with her, and she was reading the same column. That was incredible. You got an incredible response.
Yeah.
We were talking about the rape of a 4-year-old, 3-year-old
little girl.
Can you tell us about the response that happened? The letters that came in.
That was an enormous response. Yeah, it touched a chord that was a bit scary. It was eye-opening to me. It showed me that this is a definite problem. It showed me that there's a lot of people out there who are scarred and wanting to heal. It showed me that there's a lot of people who have shared, I don't know, is it a generation? Has it always been like this? The question of childhood sexual abuse.
It's difficult, isn't it, Bob? I think the media brings it out more in our age, but maybe it has always been there.
I think a part of what's happening to this syndrome, and probably to me, as a journalist, I think there's a trend in psychotherapy that says, shed the guilt, there is no guilt, there is no blame. And to do that, tell people about it, let it out. So I mean, what more effective way of doing that is than to call your friendly neighborhood newspaper columnist.
You had a couple of weeks of letters coming in, and these were from 50, 60-year-old women, as well as 30-year-olds, who had forgotten that this happened, and then it came back, or who had suppressed it and never told anyone. And all of a sudden they're writing in, leaving their names to Bob Stahl, and it's in the paper.
Yeah, that was really
powerful. That was incredible.
Well, it's very interesting as a writer to see this, to see yourself connecting at that deep a level.
And it was also, if I can just interrupt too, it was very graphic. I mean, you went into things where the child was hiding the underpants, the stained, and stealing sheets because the sheets were bloodied, and being embarrassed and going to school. And I mean, this is important to get this stuff out.
Yeah, those kind of details are really disturbing, but I think they're what creates that level of pain in the people. And I think to communicate their situation, I think the writer has to do that. And there was no reticence on the part of these people to tell me this stuff. And I think that finally it was healthy. I've talked to some psychiatrists since. In fact, in some cases I consulted their doctors before printing just to make sure that I wasn't tipping someone over the edge.
Right.
You know, it's a little bit frightening that way, to realize that you're dealing with that kind of emotional dynamite. And letting out those very intimate details, I think, was healthy for these people. I have to think that, because...
Well, actually, I don't know if you remember, but a lot of them in the letters that you printed said that it was a healing experience for them. That this, in fact, was the first time in their lives that they had talked about this. And now they're talking about it in a newspaper to thousands of people. So a lot of them did say that.
Thank goodness. Because
so I'm reassuring you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. I do worry.
Yeah. You've also done columns on schizophrenia. You take up the cause of the underdog a lot too. Champion.
I think it was almost accidental, but I think it was natural for me. I think once again we get back to looking at this role as the writer on stage. I think a part of it is the necessity to really communicate on the printed page, and recognizing that the only stuff people want is stuff that they can relate to themselves. So I end up writing about people all the time, really. And I also want to have an impact viscerally, not just intellectually, not to talk about policies, but to make people... I'm glad to hear that something brought a tear to your eye, quite frankly. It's not...
Oh, it did. It was...
I don't want to think that it's maudlin or purple or yellow or lurid or schlocky stuff, but that it perhaps connected with something that you can empathize with. Not
That's
necessarily
right.
that you were abused, but you could recognize that
Yeah.
there's a pain
And
that is part of
yeah.
the human condition.
And what brought the tear to my eye
Yeah.
was the fact that it wasn't just listed as, the facts, the statistics, that you went into those gruesome details of this young child going through this, and and that's the descriptive, the emotional.
Yeah, what I try to do, I think, is deal with issues through people.
Right.
I let people stand for whole issues, and I think the readers who are also people can therefore connect. They can empathize, they can sympathize. It's why if I don't do the stuff that might be a tearjerker, I'll try to do something funny. I'll try to connect emotionally,
Right.
and get a laugh, or a tear, or a shudder, because it sinks in more.
Right.
It's more effective. And that's an artistic consideration too. So when you say before I do the underdog, I think I talked myself into that kind of empathy. In the communicating of these people's plight and the searching for sort of the right images or words to do it, I think I quite often end up talking myself into a point of view before I then go out and convince the reader. Maybe it's a kind of method acting. I don't know.
Well, whatever
Yeah,
it's doing, it works.
It
Must be very gratifying for you. I mean, to have these responses,
Yeah.
and to be causing some good. And actually, you've done very practical things too. There was a man waiting a triple bypass.
Yeah.
Couldn't, and was almost dying, and just you wrote about it, and then next week he was taken in. They bent the rules because
Yeah.
it was in your column. So
It's that's another scary part of it.
It is scary.
The fact that, what
this
did I
is
do? I
happening
got
out
this
there.
guy his
Yeah.
operation, sure.
Yeah.
But he bumped someone else, didn't he?
That's
so
right.
there's an obligation within me to consider all of that, and sometimes to have to shut it all out and recognize that if I'm dealing with a certain person, he may get lucky because he's suddenly in the spotlight. Let him stand for the whole thing, and hope that the reader and the government, quite frankly,
right.
and the necessary officials who've got to change some of these things, are seeing the extent of the suffering and the need, and that they'll help not just this one guy, but they'll recognize that the entire issue is going to need addressing. One hopes that their thinking can extend that far.
You came about, you were telling me earlier that you came about this human issue and this very emotional writing in your columns quite by accident. As a writer, as you mentioned, you were looking for powerful images, things, and now you've gotten caught up in it. It's changed you?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm a nicer guy. I went through a period of 10 years or so where I wasn't writing, where I was your kind of buttoned down administrator. Very deliberately, that period, after writing magazine articles, very deliberately did I decide not to work. And to me, the only real work was writing. Selling insurance is talking, and digging ditches is a chore, but the real work.
Yes, a lot of people that are listening to this won't be able to identify with that.
Probably
so I just
not.
commented because they'll think, well, writers, all they have to do is take up the paper and write. What an easy job.
Oh, yeah.
These guys are getting paid for
Well,
nothing.
they had to chain, I think it was Mrs. Kafka had to lock the door on him and chain him to his typewriter virtually. She wouldn't let him out because it was the only way he could be held to it. Someone else's character I was writing as sweating blood, and then wiping your forehead and wringing out the droplets, and then marketing that.
Why is it so difficult?
I think there's very few ways that people actually have of communicating what's on their mind. Talking is one, and I'm not very good at that. Writing, I find I can connect better. I can more purely
But why is it so
tell
hard?
what's on my mind.
Is it so difficult? Is it because you're going down deep into the subconscious? Or
Probably. Probably.
I mean,
I don't want to get too flaky about this.
Right.
But at the same time that you're communicating what you're thinking, you're doing it also as the creative artist. You're trying to replicate reality. A painter paints, and he tries to give you his vision, and it's either starkly photographic or there's a little something in it that makes it a personal vision. A singer sings and a dancer dances, and they imbue what they're trying to communicate with their own self and their own vision. And there's a real pressure in doing that. And I don't think any of those other kinds of artists find it any easier than I'm,
It's just
than
as
I'm
difficult.
characterizing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a little lonelier.
Yeah.
The writer in his garret, looking at his typewriter or the blank page.
Right. That's hardly your case. You can write at home and do your runs in between, but I know you do burn the candle and you get into the garret at times.
Yeah.
Let's leave the column for a bit.
Sure.
We'll come back to it.
I'd love to.
Okay. Prior to doing the column, you were deputy, you got to help me with this, deputy...
Managing editor.
Managing, thank you, for the province.
Yeah.
Now, what a contrast. This is a 9-to-5
My hair was
administrator
shorter.
job, right?
Yeah.
Pressure, looking after people, organizing.
Yeah, it was exactly the sort of thing that I'm not suited for.
How did
It's
you do
probably
it?
the Peter Pan principle. I was not writing. I was deliberately, as I was starting to tell you,
Because it was
looking
easy.
for
Okay,
ways not to write
right, yeah.
for a living.
Right.
Okay, so I ended up. I think I first started writing headlines and editing other people's copy, and I realized, I write a 4-word headline instead of a 4,000-word piece, and maybe they'll pay me almost the same. What a good scam, right? So I tried that for a few years. This is back at the time when I was working for Weekend Magazine, and I started to write headlines and edit copy and write cut lines, and that seemed a real easy way to make a living. Then I had a bunch of kids and moved to Vancouver and realized that I couldn't continue as a freelance writer, which is what I had been at the last period of my magazine writing. I needed a solid check to grow the kids and pay the mortgage. So I stopped writing for most of 10 or 12 years, and in retrospect, I was brain dead. As a writer, I've got to keep writing to be able to connect to those parts of me that really think or really create. I was an administrator, and I can't even organize my own life. I don't know what I was thinking. I can't write the checks on time. I can't compile a list at the beginning of the day of what I'm going to go out and do.
Your newspaper background, you brought a lot of that to your job too.
Well, I was probably good in the area of setting standards or impossible ones for myself or anybody else. There's a frustration that you're not doing it yourself. There's a frustration that someone else is doing something that may not exactly be how you would do it. There's mostly, from my point of view, a frustration in not having the control. So if you're administering or supervising 100 people at a newspaper, it's not the kind of control I want. I would rather have the nuts and bolts control of tightening and screwing and hammering and sawing myself.
Let's go back, because we've had a lot, like you've almost had a charmed career, and that thing sort of fell into your lap.
Oh, yeah.
So we want to get into that before, because it's only half our show, Bob. We could go much longer. We want to get back into that in the 60s. So we're going to go way back to how this all started.
Yes, doctor.
Okay. After high school, you went on to McGill in English. Now, English was always your forte, wasn't it, as a kid?
Yeah.
You enjoyed...
I think it's because I couldn't sing or dance, I went to McGill University and flunked out after first year. I spent a whole year shooting pool at the student union. I did really well in English. I think I led the class of 2,000 people, and I failed every other subject. We're talking of an idiot savant here, someone who's just really not too swift but has one minor talent. Okay. So I went from there to Sir George Williams University, which is now Concordia.
But at that time, you were writing for the McGill Daily. You were doing
I did junior soccer for the McGill Daily.
Right.
Yeah, I was their junior soccer correspondent, and I could appear on page 32 and have 4 paragraphs in print, and that was my first writing job. From there, I went to community weeklies in Montreal and a summer job at the Montreal Star at about age 17 or 18, which is, I guess, the beginning of solid journalism for me.
You were fortunate. Well, not fortunate. You were talented, but
it was a
you're
time
lucky.
when newspaper jobs had that real aura of glamour and
hard
romance.
to get.
Oh yeah. There were probably 80 kids, applying for that summer job I got that year, and there were probably I think there were 2 openings. Okay, so yeah, it was great to get that, and I got on the strength of some silly feature for Community Weekly. And yeah, I ended up a few years later after doing
Graduation?
features and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay, now you're
I worked
finishing
a
up
couple
at Sir
years.
George, right?
I worked a couple days a week as
Yeah.
I was at
Yeah.
Sir George, still for the Star. So I was at
Right.
the same time working on a newspaper and going to school full time, which in retrospect was great because it meant that when I wanted to drop out 5 years later after graduating, I was a solid kind of professional. I'd already worked in Ottawa as I was the youngest parliamentary correspondent in the country in 1967. I was 24 years old, and everybody else was sort of tweety and smoking their pipes in Parliament Hill. And
Quite something at 24.
yeah, and there I was, and this was good to have done.
And this,
I was boring me silly at the time.
Right.
You know, it's a kind of very responsible, grown-up kind of
And-
journalism I didn't want to be doing. I wanted
Right.
to be the poet. This is the 60s, eh?
is this the time that you won this job, or you had a big break over many people who are quite well known now? Can you tell us about that? Was this the opportunity?
Oh, no, that was actually starting at the Star.
Oh, was it at the Star? But there,
yeah. That,
some of the people that you won over have gone on to.
Oh, David Taffler, I
Right,
recall. He's
right,
he's the publisher
yeah.
of the Financial Times, I think, or Post at this point.
Yeah.
David, where are you out there?
Anyway, he sat there doing it.
Yeah, he got a job the next year though. So
Yeah.
you know, we can't say that he failed
Yeah.
totally in life. It was a real exciting period in Montreal in terms of
Yeah.
people coming up, people I was working with.
But at the same time, what I'm saying is your
Yeah.
talent was recognized then at,
Yeah.
at a young age.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, it just meant that that I was able to drop out later
Right.
and have something to come back to.
Right. Okay.
Um,
Before we talk about the dropping out, you're
Okay, I don't wanna talk about
you're
dropping
this
out.
parliamentary correspondent,
Yeah.
not Ottawa, right? In the
Yeah,
60s.
yeah.
And this was during the rise of Trudeau.
Yeah.
Quite an exciting time. Tell
Oh,
us
it really
a bit about
was.
that. Yeah.
Really, this was a guy who you'd have to love at first blush because he was so different from every other politician. I remember, you know, it was the leadership race of '68 was
Right.
Trudeau,
Turner.
Hellier. Remember those guys?
Right.
And they were all old school politicians. I mean, even John Turner, who was this gloriously handsome looking devil who was your Rhodes Scholar and accomplished athlete, was still plastic compared to Pierre, who was that guy who would play with a mic, you know, as he was sitting there and sit back and tell you that he'd swum the Bay of Pigs or thrown snowballs at statues of Lenin, and he was everything candid and non-stagey
Right.
in politics. And that was really effective. You realized in '67, '8 that he couldn't have been a creature of any other time. You know, it was almost like the Beatles, the '60s, allowed some persona like that to emerge. So he was really disappointing within a few years. You know, when power corrupted
Right.
Pierre, it really did. And he became the mask, and he became the aloof and arrogant figure, which was really disappointing to people who saw this really ingenuous, charismatic. The charisma was just his naturalness.
Right.
And that's what a lot of people don't fully
Right.
realize. It wasn't some great feat of oration. There was a great art. He's enormously articulate and intelligent, but mostly it was
It was him.
You didn't see that filter between mind
Right.
and mouth that you see in politicians, where they're worrying about how what they're saying is going to be received.
Right.
And this guy, you didn't worry about. So it was an exciting time to be in Ottawa, but it was also a time when probably it was too early for me to be,
Right.
settling into a middle-aged journalistic career.
So
Yeah.
here we have Bob in Ottawa doing extremely well at this young age with this
Yeah.
really successful job, and then your whole life changed. You got a letter. Tell us about the letter.
Yeah, I told you about that. Eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a letter from the
That's
Montreal Star personnel department telling me that I had to join the company pension plan because I was approaching age 25, and they filled it all out for me. You know, it had name, address, phone number, it had date of retirement. And
Which
it said
was?
August 31st, 2008.
2008.
Now this,
right.
it sounds a little terrible now. This was 1968, okay? And this freaked me. I mean, it really did. I'd only gone into newspapers as a way of making a living by writing, and here I was, enslaved for life if I signed here.
So what'd you do?
So instead of sending them back that form, I sent them a letter of resignation. And the resignation was effective 6 months thence, so very shrewdly and responsibly was I able to save up. My wife and I, we lived on her salary at that point, banked mines, sold all our furniture, traded our Volvo for a VW van, and I hit the road in Europe and North Africa for 3 years as a hippie.
And you lived on how much money for 3 years?
Well, $6,000 for 3 years for 2 people. Hey, figure that out, eh?
Right.
So this is about $1,000 a person. If you sleep in a van and you hang out in places like Moroccan fishing villages, you don't spend much money, and it was wonderful. It was great. It was a good time to be young, and it was probably good for me because it was.
You probably needed the break.
Yeah. I'd
Starting
been
so young and being so responsible.
Working as a journalist
as a kid
from very early. Yeah. It also meant that when I came back, I was able to get back in at a decent level because people remembered that I'd written certain things 3 years earlier. I came back just to raise enough money to leave again, and I'm still here.
So when you came back, you worked at the Weekend magazine, and you had a lot of really good jobs, and then you decided you'd had it with the big city, and you came out to Vancouver.
Hey, you summed it all up. Right.
I summed it all up because our time is running out, Bob. As I said, there's lots we didn't cover, but you know, people can read your column and find out the rest from that. And thank you once again.
I'll let them know bit by bit.
Okay, for coming down and
thanks, Gloria.
Having everyone who reads you every morning see you in person, listen to you, and good luck to you with the column.
That's great.
Okay?
Nice to meet you.
Thank you. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Anderson's for providing this lovely setting for the interviews. For contact, I'm Gloria Creighton. Please join us again next time.